Square and cube roots can be used to find answers to problems about area and volume. This is because if I have a square and I know that the square has an area of 196 square centimeters, I could use this to find the length of one side. If I think about what I know about a square, I know that all of my sides are the same. So if this side is x, then all other sides are also x. Well, I know that to find the area of a parallelogram, which is what a square is, I would multiply base times height, or length times width. Well, in this case, the base would be x, and the height would also be x. So really, my area is x times x, which is the same as x squared. Well, in this case, I know that my area is 196. So I know that it is 196 that would give me x times x, or x squared. If you have an equation that says x to the second power, you can solve this by finding the square root of both sides of the equation. That would leave you with x by itself. Then you would take the square root of this side. Well, the square root of 196 is, remember, 14 and negative 14, because every square root has two solutions. However, to answer this question, what is the length of one side? We have to think about what positive and negative numbers mean. It is impossible to have a negative length. So in this case, I know that the side length of the square is equal to positive 14 centimeters. If I have another square that has an area of 289 square inches, then I know that length times width is 289. So I know that 289 is equal to x to the second power. Well, again, if I have x to the second power and I need to find x by itself, I would find the square root of both sides of the equation. The square root of x squared is x, and I know that that's true because x times x is x squared. Then the square root of 289 is positive and negative 17. But we know that negative numbers cannot be side lengths, so for this, the side length is equal to 17 inches. If a cube has a volume of 216 centimeters cubed, and we want to find the length of one side, we have to think about what volume means. In this case, if I have a cube, I know that all of the side lengths are the same, and a cube is like a rectangular prism. So the formula for volume would be length times width times height. Well, with a cube, the length, if the length is x, the width is also x, and the height is also x, because the length, width, and height of a cube are all the same. For this particular problem, I know that the volume is 216. So 216 is the same as x times x times x. Well, remember, x times x times x is the same as x to the third power. So 216 is like x to the third power. Well, just like to get a square root or a square variable by itself, to get a cubed variable by itself, I would need to take the cubed root of both sides of an equation. Well, I know that the cubed root of 216 is 6, and I know that that's true because 6 times 6 times 6 gives me 216. The cubed root of x cubed is x. I know that that's true because x times x times x is x cubed. That means that one side length for this cube is equal to 6 centimeters. If a cube has a volume of 64 feet cubed, what is the length of one side? Well, again, we know that volume is equal to length times width times height, but that's the same as x times x times x, so it's x cubed. In this case, if our volume is 64, then we know that 64 is equal to x cubed. To get x by itself, we would need to find the cubed root of both sides of this equation. Remember, cube root is not the same as square root. It's very easy to get confused with a number like 64 because 64 is both a perfect square and a perfect cube. But the cubed root of 64 is actually 4, not 8. The cubed root of x cubed is just x. So that means that one side length of this cube is equal to 4 feet. Now, we can do some practice with this. If I have x to the second power and I know that it equals 1.21, to figure out what x equals, I would need to get x by itself, so I would take the square root of both sides. That would leave me with x equals, and I know that this says 1.21, but if we think about 1.21 and think about perfect squares, that looks very similar to 121. Well, I know that 121 has is a perfect square because 11 times 11 equals 121. For this, I can think about 11 and change it to 1.1, and then I could check it in my calculator. If I do 1.1 times 1.1, I get 1.21. So that means that 1.1 is the square root of 1.21. For x cubed equals 27, to get x by itself, I would need to take the cube root of both sides. That would leave me with x equals, and then the cubed root of 27 gives me 3. For x squared equals 1.69, I'm going to take the square root of both sides, which leaves me with x equals, well, again, 1.69 is not a perfect square or not a whole number, but we can think about whole numbers that we know that are perfect squares, and we know that 169 is the same as 13 times 13. Well, if I can think about that, then that probably means that 1.69 is the same as 1.3 times 1.3. Well, we can put that in our calculators and check, and when we do 1.3 times 1.3, we do get 1.69. So the square root of 1.69 is 1.3. Now remember, it can also be negative 1.3, which is true for our first problem as well. If x cubed equals negative 512, then to get x by itself, I would need to take the cube root of both sides. That would leave me with x equals, and then I would need to find the cubed root of 512. Well, we know that the cube root of 512 is 8. So that means that the cubed root of negative 512 is negative 8. And we know that this is true because negative 8 times negative 8 times negative 8 will give us negative 512. For x squared equals 36, I would take the square root of both sides. The square root of x is x, and the square root of 36 is positive and negative 6 because both of those, 6 times 6 equals 36, and negative 6 times negative 6 also equals 36. For x cubed equals negative 125, I would need to get x by itself by finding the cube root of each side. Well, the cube root of x cubed is just x. And the cubed root of negative 125 is going to be negative 5. And I know that that's true because negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5 equals negative 125. Now for this, if I know that the cubed root of x is 3, then what I need to ask myself is 3 times 3 times 3 equals what? Well, I know that it equals 27. So that means that x equals 27. I know that this is true because if I find the cube root of x and I replace x with 27, I am going to get 3. If the square root of x is 5, then that means that x equals 25 because 5 times 5 is 25. If I replaced x with 25, I know that the square root of 25 is 5 is correct. Now for the cube root of x, if I know that the cube root of x is negative 2, then I need to do negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Well, negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, but remember positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So for this, I know that x equals negative 8. This makes sense because if I find the cube root of negative 8, I am going to get negative 2. For the square root of x equals 4, I would just take 4 and square it. So I would do 4 times 4, which is 16. So I know for this that x equals 16. For the square root of x equals 6, I know that I would need to square 6. So 6 times 6 would give me 36. So for this, x equals 36. If the cubed root of x is negative 1, then I would need to do negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. Well, remember these two would give me a positive 1, but then when I multiplied by negative 1, I would get negative 1. So for this, x equals negative 1.